Hey, everybody.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Welcome.
Hey,
Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already seen the doc with questions, I'm going to paste it into the chat right now. What do you think, Jake? Should we just jump into it?
I say we just jump into it. Yeah. But we should probably start by seeing if anybody who's on the call live asked any of these questions. So we do those first, maybe?
Yeah.
Have any of you posted one of these questions in the doc? No.
I posted a couple. Let's see.
Oh, okay, great.
The first one that I posted was you sold a design sprint to a client. What kind of work is done leading up to the sprint? Like how long before and who's involved?
Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll start with that.
Sure.
That's a great question. And
let me give a little bit of backstory first, and then I think you might be able to fill in more details, Jake. Like just one thing to keep in mind, like as we answer this question, is the context in which we developed the design sprint was at Google Ventures, where we were investing in all these different startups. And like part of our motivation was to find a really scalable and repeatable way to help those companies. And so the process itself is obviously like optimized to be efficient and be a good use of time, but also all of the work around it. So what happens before it, what happens after it. And so we, apart from like gathering the team and getting the space, we like kind of like set things up so that like the process that's described in the book doesn't like kind of assumes that you didn't do anything before. Obviously, like everybody who comes into that room and comes into that sprint is going to bring some knowledge and bring some expertise and some background with them. But we kind of, I mean, I know that there's a longer answer to this. And so Jake, I'm hoping you can help fill in some of the details, but I do think it's worth like remembering that like the process that's in the book was specifically designed to not require any prep work, because that was what like made the most sense for the model that we were operating in.
Yeah, I think that context is super important. And it's also important because we weren't doing it as consultants, because we were in that weird context. We didn't have to figure out some of the things that I think there are things that are helpful to do. And I'll sort of list those, but you shouldn't consider me an expert on the prep before, because of all the reasons John described. And it is true that like, you don't have to do, I don't think you have to do as much prep as you would for other kinds of workshops or events where you're working directly with a client, because so much of it is intended to happen in like, so much of the discovery and understanding and building up like context really needs to kind of happen in the sprint so that the people on the team get the benefit of it. And so that's why, that's sort of another reason why we don't want to do too much ahead of time, because people will just forget. There's some amount of extra work you could pour in, and then people will just forget and they won't be able to act on it. So we want to like do that unpacking and discovery stuff in the sprint, so that then it's like it's in short-term memory. People can synthesize it real time, put it into their solutions or put it into their decision-making process and like act on it. So anyway, so that's okay. So that's like the big disclaimer, but the other parts of it are it's really good to have a handle, like to, I guess for one thing, to make really sure that the person who hired you, like the deciding person, knows what the design sprint is and like how it's going to work. And I know that seems weird because like you'd think that they would know when they made the choice to do it, but it is possible to sell this thing and have that person not really know. So I think like you need a buddy inside the team who totally knows what the sprint is, so that person can help you do the next steps, to set up the sprint to work well. you need a few things, and part of it requires an insider who really gets what's going to happen. So once that person gets it and you can talk to that person, you need the right team. And so figuring out who the right team is non-trivial and very important to the sprint's success. So figuring out who is the right decider. And in many cases, I found like I have to push a lot on that person, my buddy, to make sure that we really got the right decider. Is that person, actually the decision maker, or are they just somebody who reports to the decision maker and they're kind of used to being a proxy? But John and I have seen that go wrong many times before. So we want to really have the decision maker and try to, that's the first key, is really like, who's the real decision maker? And even if we can only get that person for half an hour, like really pressing to get that person in. The next part is the rest of the team. So getting some sense from that person, usually they have a good sense. Usually I feel like my buddy has a good sense of who the decision maker is and is willing to be a good advocate because they're already signed on to do this thing, and has a good sense of who's on the team and who should come in to the sprint. But it's just a good idea to go through these archetypes of like, okay, who is a business expert on this? Do we have a business expert on this product in the room? Do we have an expert on building it? If that's an engineer, or, in the case of like some healthcare products we work with, that might've been a physician, but do we have a builder, like a person who like really knows how to do the thing who's there? Do we have a customer expert? That might be somebody from sales. It might be a researcher, might be marketing expert, customer support. Maybe it's more than one of those things, but I know that archetype of like business expert, builder, customer expert, and then usually like designer is another one of those archetypes. Like, do we have a designer in there? Those are going to be really important to have. And so I just have a conversation like that where I'm like, who knows how to build this thing? The assurance that you also need to know that the people who are going to be in the room, that team, that they understand roughly what the design sprint is. They don't have to know exactly what it is, but they do need to have a basic idea, because they're giving you a lot of time, and it's courteous to make sure that they understand. And it's also going to help you, because if you don't have to convince them during the whole week that they should continue to be invested, it's nice if they're like, yeah, okay, like we're in on this. And we did not ever work super hard at this, but we would use this 90-second video. So I would basically tell people, like, if possible, please buy a copy of the book for everybody on your team and give it to them. This is going to serve two purposes. Like, there's a slim chance that they might read the book. There's a decent chance they might flip through the book. And at the minimum, it's going to make them feel very confident that this is a real thing, because it's bananas. But even in the year 2020, like, people still find a hardcover book to be kind of magic in terms of making it feel like it's real. So getting the book in people's hands is actually really helpful. And obviously self-serving for us, but helpful. And then sending out a link to this 90-second video and this, we would use this blog post called Stop Brainstorming and Start Sprinting, which is just, we kind of wrote to be like an overview of the process for teams, to give people like an easy handle on what it is. And some people would like to watch the video. Some people might like to just skim the blog post. If people have the books, that's great too. But somewhere between that mix of things, people are likely to get, a good handle on the process. And then the last thing, sorry, this is a really long, elaborate answer, but the other thing that I like to do, especially if I'm going to try to do the sprint, so there are situations where I want to do the sprint in 4 days. And so I'm compressing map, sketch, and decide for one reason or another. That is a thing that happens. If that's the case, or if I have any other reason to be extra stressed about the sprint, I want to talk to my buddy on the team ahead of time and come up with a draft map, which is something I could probably do in a 30-minute call with her or him. We just like sit down and say, okay, like, let's just imagine we're making the map right now. What are the, who are the customers, how they move through. And it's okay if that map isn't super detailed, it's uninformed, but that allows me in the sprint to copy that up, say, okay, I talked, so-and-so and I talked, and this was after that conversation, this was the map I made. Now I don't really know what I'm talking about. So I try to lower the prestige of that map a lot in the beginning. I'm like, I don't really, this is just a draft. Like, I just kind of jotted this down, but maybe as a starting place for us, I'm using all this language to kind of like make it easy to approach and make it easy for them to criticize it and edit it. But that, I know if I have that in my pocket, it will make that first day go a bit faster. And then the one thing I forgot is that when you're talking about who goes in the team, but sometimes it comes out actually in doing that mapping process, even more of this will come out. You have to line up the expert interviews, and lining up those expert interviews is important too, figuring out who's not on this team, who we should talk to, who will help us with alignment, who will give us interesting perspectives. And then logistics, do we have the same room for the whole week? Do we have the right supplies? You probably won't have the right supplies unless you order them yourselves or bring them yourself. It's very unlikely that people will interpret a list of supplies the way I want it to be interpreted, unless I just literally mandate specifically, here's the thing, and I'm kind of a jerk about bringing these. But it's often easier to just bring it myself. And the same with snacks. Snacks has screwed us up in the past before, not having good snack access. So actually having I'm gonna bring the snacks, or I really want to make sure, buddy, do we have coffee? How do you get coffee there? What does it take? So
it'd be a complete disaster if there's no
could be a
coffee.
complete disaster when you can't access coffee. That is a game ruiner. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to try to summarize most of our answers in the doc. So I was just putting some stuff in there, and including, I put in a link to this sprint planner template that we have used. I'll post a link in the chat too, just for reference. And one thing that's on there that I think is worth a mention, it's worth calling out, is to do kind of a quick check on research. Makes it sound very big and fancy, but make sure that enough of the people in the room know enough about the customers and about what's going on already. And if not, you might need to do a study, you might need to do some interviews. You might need to I remember in a lot of our sprints, we would sort of talk about that. And then maybe somebody on the team would say oh yeah, we have a bunch of data on that, but I'm going to have to go and pull it together, and then they would make some slides to show us. Or our partner, Michael, who's a customer researcher, he'd say, you know what, I'm going to go do a quick, couple interviews with some customers and just see what's going on. So you don't always need to do that, but you at least need to check that the knowledge is in the heads of the people. And if it's not, you need to go gather some knowledge before the sprint, because the sprint is really a bet on the knowledge and the skills and the capabilities of the people in the room. And if those things are not up to snuff, then you can't take a team that doesn't know what's going on and like help them know what's going on. If they know what's going on, you can help them do amazing things in a sprint, but got to make sure you're at a sort of a baseline level of knowledge and awareness of what's happening.
That's a really good way to put it. That's the theme of the preparation, is that the people in the room know what's going on, that you have the right people, you do have the right people, and that they know what's going on. And then if that's the case, then the recipe as being self-contained works. But that is where things could trip you up, and where no matter how well you facilitate, it won't matter if the right people aren't in the room and they don't have the right information.
All right, should we move on to another question? I'm going to move this one to the bottom, and then we'll pick another one to do. What do you think, Jake?
I think we should let people who are in the call choose which question they'd like to have answered next, or stick one in there if they, if there's one that they don't see, to ask it. Anybody want to jump in?
Hey, does anybody want to jump in? I just pasted one at the bottom, but if folks have questions out there, I'm happy to just take my turn.
Jake, I think we should talk about the stakeholders, sort of convincing, selling, kind of interpreting
I
results.
have a question.
Yeah.
What? Okay. Can we have like a multiple sprint, like have different groups doing like 3 groups at the same time?
Yeah, good question. So yes, you can, but we haven't done that very much. Yeah, you know, it's funny. Okay, so I've done that a few times with many groups at once, in contexts where, well, okay, so I've taught that at a school, so where there's many teams going in parallel, and I've done that a few times. Most recently in January at Harvard Business School, which I'm saying just strictly to name drop. But the thing that's cool about that is, besides the name drop, is that they have this program there. They're basically trying to have students who might otherwise drop out and start their company on their own. They want them to stay there and give Harvard money. So they're doing startups. So these are all teams of 2 and 3 and 4 who are like actually trying to start a company. And so they're working. So there's probably like a dozen teams in parallel. And I've done it as sort of a training. Every time that we teach workshops in person, John and I, we have people running in parallel doing sprints. And I've done a training like that with companies, you know, but who are working on real projects. But the reason why part of the reason why I mentioned that is the way that I would do it, if you were thinking I want to do this with 3 teams, is let's say it again.
Or even more than 3.
More than 3, yeah, it could be, and it could be more than 3. I mean, like I've done it with up to like with real problems where teams were working on like real projects. I've done it certainly with like 100-ish people. And I have this post called How to Run 13 Design Sprints at Once or something. It was with the New York Times. They have this sort of thing they call Maker Week, where they do projects for the whole week. And so I ran design sprints, and there were like 13 teams in the room. But basically the way that I would do that is to, especially if you have, I think the max you could potentially, if you have like 15 people, or 20 people, you might be able to do some of the map activities with everybody in the same room, but it'd be like kind of gnarly, but you might be able to do it. And then you split off to do the rest of the things after maybe you have one map or you've done the expert interviews together or something. But what probably makes the most sense is just to have the teams running in parallel. And you could do that where like you are the MC. So kind of like John and I did in the boot camp last week, like we're running through the activities, and then you have, what I've ever done is had people sitting at different tables. Each team is at a table. And so they then do the activity. They do they make their own map. They have a facilitator at their table. One of them is set to be the facilitator, and they'll draw the map, and they'll do their own how might we's. They'll do their own expert interviews at the table. They'll do their own sketching, deciding. They do all of that at the table. And then you would be like circulating around to help them out. And then saying like, okay, time's up. Like, here's the next activity. The next activity is this. And you sort of like walk them through it. You have slides maybe up, or if you're doing it over video, same thing. Maybe you have breakout rooms in Zoom, and then you bring everybody back in and share your screen. You're like, okay, here's the next activity. So I think it's totally doable. It's a bit of like logistics hassle for sure.
What do you do, Jake? What do you do with the results? Like, how do you combine or deduplicate like the results from each of the teams?
I haven't done it like that, where you have teams working on the same problem, and they might come to the same conclusion, or probably like a variation of the same conclusion. However, I have like thought that through a few times because people have asked about it, and so I can just tell you what I think would make sense is that if possible, if you have teams who have the same target, then the same target customer, and especially the same target in the map, you could potentially, if there aren't too many of those, let's say you have 3 teams who've made prototypes. It's possible you could test them with the same customers and bring everybody together to watch a test where they're testing 5 prototypes from 3 different teams, and they're just showing them, and they all look like they're separate products. and then the customers kind of watch them head to head, which would be super interesting actually, to see how that went. It is more likely that if you have a lot, especially as you have like more than 3 teams, I don't think that would be doable. And then I think what you'd have to do is bring everybody back together after the tests were over and have people share the story of their sprint. Here's where we chose to focus. Here's what we prototyped. Here's what we learned from the test. And maybe you give everybody a template sort of to share a few slides with images of what they did and what they came up with. And that sort of grid we showed at the end of green and red and what they're trying to learn next. I have, so the other place that I know did something more like that is Lego. And there's I'll find the link and post it into the chat, but there's an interview on a podcast with this guy from Lego talking about how they had I think they had 10 teams running in parallel, and some of them were solving the same problem. And so they sort of would they'd come up with their solution, test it, and then they would kind of compete, well, which one of these do we think is the best?
So that's my question. What if they're not working in the same project?
If they're not working on the same project, then that's easier because you don't have to have a sort of a tournament of who wins at the end. They would just go on and do their next sprint on their own or whatever, but you just let them do their test. The prototyping and testing they're going to kind of have to do on their own. So whenever I've done this, I've helped a lot with map, sketch, and decide, with stepping them through that. But then once they get to prototype and test, they just kind of have to do it. And you could help them troubleshoot doing it, but you can't be on 10 teams at once helping them prototype, or 10 teams at once helping them test. It doesn't scale at that point.
Yeah.
I think
maybe have like a facilitator on each group. So,
yeah, but the facilitator in each group, if you're emceeing, you're sort of the master of ceremonies of the whole thing for those map, sketch, and decide steps, you don't need you don't need the same kind of facilitation on the team. You just basically choose a leader from each team, and you're going to basically, by being the MC, you're going to help that person a lot to get it done.
Great, thank you. Sure.
I think there's a good rule of thumb, which is that if you have if there's, let's say, you're working with a company and they want to have 30 people in a sprint, it's better to split that into 3 groups of 10 and have them each run a sprint than to try to figure out how to have everybody do the same sprint together. So we find that there are diminishing returns from adding more and more and more people to the same sprint. You're just going to come up with the same ideas over and over. But if you can split people off and have people go off and explore something a little bit different or a different part of the problem, then you can make a ton of progress by sort of dividing and conquering the problem. I think, Jake, we should ask everybody to upvote, put an emoji or something next to the questions. Cause that way it's not just whoever.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Is brave enough to speak up.
That's a more sprinty way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So use whatever emoji you want in the doc. Just sort of place your vote next to the question that you want us to answer next.
While we do that, can I ask a very quick question? On the prototyping apps or tools that you recommended was Figma, and also you mentioned.
So Figma is I mean, it's a prototyping tool, but it's really for designing screens. So it's like, it can also be used for like production design work. So you can do like all of your design, like down to super tiny details in Figma. So I think if you or a designer you're working with are comfortable in Figma, then it's a great tool to use. But usually when we talk about prototyping tools, we're talking about a tool where you can take screens that were created in any app and draw hotspots over it to make them clickable, to create sort of a simulation of an actual finished software product. And probably the most popular one for that is InVision, and it's pretty good. Although InVision does a lot of other things, but Jake just pasted a link into the chat for this tool called Marvel that we've used a lot. It's a lot simpler than InVision, and it's more focused on creating those clickable hotspot prototypes. If you are making like essentially a website in your sprint, like so it's going to be like a marketing website or something, you can actually use Squarespace and just like don't publish the site or don't tell anybody about the website. But Squarespace is designed to like make websites really fast, and you can pick a template and you can make something that looks super real, super fast. It won't work for more interactive, like if you're working on an app or something like that. But if it's really just a website, then Squarespace does work pretty well for that.
And how about Google Drawings?
I think that the challenge with Google Drawings might be making it look realistic enough. So usually we've used a tool to make the screens, and then a tool to stitch the images together. So we just make like static images, and we've used Keynote, and I've heard teams using PowerPoint. PowerPoint's close enough, and I could imagine you could use Google Slides. I mean, you can make things look pretty good in Google Slides. I think realistic enough. Google Drawings probably could work for that. It's been a while since I've used it, but I don't think like I said, it has been a while since I've used it. I don't think you get any of that hotspot, like linking together things so it's buttons, but you might be able to make the flat images in Google Drawings. I think any tool that people are comfortable with using that they can get access to is fine for the drawing of stuff. And some of those prototyping tools allow you to draw in them, but it's kind of easier if you just like, we always liked a really simple tool to mock stuff up, and so many people are familiar with making slides that can work. And then a really simple tool to stitch the things together, and to not necessarily try to have one tool do everything. Yeah.
Okay.
So the most votes landed next to what common mistakes do you see new facilitators make? So should we tackle that one, Jake?
Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna have to think for a second. Do you have any thoughts before?
I think the biggest one, and I make this mistake myself still today when I'm facilitating. You have to like learn to be kind of a jerk. And it's like a weird thing to learn. And it feels like, if you're a nice person, I assume you're all nice people. If you're a nice person, it feels kind of weird to say like, okay, let's stop talking. Like, there's all these awkward things that you have to do that don't fit into the normal rules of polite society. But when you learn to be kind of, trying to think of a better word than jerky. When you learn to be sort of, like particular and adamant about the way things are done, then people actually, I have found that they sort of respect you and they respect the process more, because they feel like, oh, there's like, we're doing these things for a reason. There's a structure here. This isn't just the whim of the facilitator. So that's not like a specific skill, but it's something like when I like, I've seen that a lot in my facilitation and with other people, like just sort of letting conversations go on way too long, or like getting off track, or talking about things that, this is actually kind of a separate mistake or skill, which is which is like spending a lot of time on things that don't matter. Like, particularly in prototyping, teams will like get into arguments about like the way something should be laid out on the screen, or the color, or the font size, or whatever. And that stuff matters in the big picture. Like, it matters in general in the world, but it usually doesn't matter a ton in the sprint, because I mean, maybe your sprint is about, you know, the visual design, and you're trying to answer questions about the brand style and stuff like that. But usually it's not. Usually the questions are more about, do people understand it? Do they care about it? Do they want to pay for it? And all you need is like a minimum bar of, it looks good. It looks real enough that people are going to believe it. So that's another place where I see people getting off track, and I've gotten off track. I mean, we've done some sprints where the prototyping took late into the night because we sort of got distracted by parts of the prototype that really weren't core to the questions we were trying to answer in the sprint.
Yeah, those are really good. That's good. That's funny. I wasn't thinking in that on either of those lines, and those are probably the most important things I can think of, like that. Being willing to be a jerk on time is tough, and not allowing time to get. I would say that the thing that jumps out in my mind as the big time sinks are these conversations that happen on like day 1 or day 2 or day 3 of the sprint. Usually day 1 is like the time where it gets the worst, but like conversations that don't matter. And when you haven't facilitated a lot, it can be hard to know, does this conversation matter? How much rope should I give them to have this conversation before I like kind of, you know, try to pull the leash back in and say, okay, now we need to keep moving. And I still, even after like hundreds of sprints, I still get it wrong sometimes, but I'm more likely to, even if I get it wrong, not go off the deep end. Whereas in the beginning, like we would just like, maybe they would just pull me off track with a side conversation or a rat hole. The other ones that I can think of as I think it is very tempting for a new facilitator to change the recipe before really being confident with the recipe, and just changing it too soon. And I know it took us so long to get all of the things in the sprint recipe lined up in such a way that they would work for us every time. I always think, oh shoot, like I understand the instinct, because I instantly wanted to mess with things when I started facilitating design thinking workshops, for example. But my perspective on the design sprint is like really there is a reason why the sequence is there, and why things are in there, and why some things are not in there, why we don't do certain things. We have principles and reasons behind it. And so messing with it while a natural instinct is dangerous. I mean, that's not like, you know, no one's going to die probably, depending on what you're making in the sprint, but it's dangerous to the process. And the other thing I think is, I don't know if it's a mistake so much, but it's a thing that is very helpful to a facilitator that's harder to do when you're new to it, is to know why you're doing each step, and why you're doing the whole process, why you're doing each step. So the reasons behind things, and also what you don't know, when to be able to say, I don't know why. But then like fall back to, but there is a reason why we're following the recipe. So I think like the thing that somebody has to do if they're picking it up cold and they've just like, you just read the book, or you've just been in the boot camp or something, you're doing it for the first time. Part of the why is there's this recipe out there, and a lot of people have had success with it, have had good luck with it. So I want to use that recipe. But if it's the first time you facilitated a sprint, you can't say like, trust me, I've done this before and it worked, or we've done this here at our company 100 times and it worked. You don't have that at first. So the why has to be, we're following this recipe that I trust, and I've read enough about it that I can tell you why it's supposed to work in this way. But also to have a limit where you don't try to BS people, and you do at a certain point say, look, you're right, I don't know why we're doing this, or like, I'm not sure, but I think our best course is to follow this recipe that has been tested, and go forward with it. And the reason why people say this works is X or Y or Z. I think that where the error comes is in asking people to do something and not explaining why you're going to do it, or deflecting a question, acting like you know when you don't know. I think people really appreciate when you don't know and you're honest about it. And you can still be confident that you want to do the thing, you want to do this process, and be honest that you don't know why, or that it is your first time doing it. I feel like a lot of people, maybe it's just because like John and I spent so many years working with engineers who can be really like, especially at Google, it can be kind of annoying to work with. They question everything, and they're very overly empowered maybe at Google to do things on their own. And I think there's a danger in going, you'll run across people like that who are very questioning and skeptical. And if you try to bluff them, they'll smell it out. They'll know that you're full of it. And then they check out and they're not engaged anymore. And people respond better, I find, to like, I don't know. That's, we're following this recipe because I don't know, but this seems like a really good recipe. Here's why I think so. And, I don't know that this is the right answer. I don't know this is what we should choose, but that's why you guys are all here and we're doing this, because I need your help. I want you guys to help. I don't know. And I think saying I don't know is really hard.
Before we move on to the next question that has a lot of votes, there is a question that has 2 votes, but will be short and fun to answer, which is, how did Jake manage the mic sound and the music at the last boot camp?
Yeah, well, I mean, you helped me figure this out, John. I don't know if you want to explain it.
Yeah, sure. I can explain it. So one of the reasons we use Zoom, so small divergence, but we don't love Zoom. Zoom is like kind of annoying, but it has a lot of great features. And one of the features it has is the ability to share audio from the computer. And you can share audio from the computer while you are sharing your screen, but you can also click share screen, and there's an option to only share the audio, even if you're not sharing your screen at all. And then, so you can do that. And then the trick is that, like, let's say you use Spotify, or Jake, you use Apple Music, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever app you have on your computer to listen to music, it has its own volume controller. And so the trick is you got to use that volume controller to set the volume for the music, because your computer volume, that's the volume level for what's coming out of the speakers that you hear. It's not the volume level for the audio that's being sent to the Zoom call. So we got on before the boot camp started, and we tested the volume. Jake blasted some super loud music, and then he turned it way down, and then it was too quiet, and then we adjusted it back and forth, and then he couldn't hear me, and then whatever. So we got it dialed in, but that's the key thing is share audio through Zoom, and use the volume control on your music app. And then it's really cool because the mute in Zoom, so mute my audio, it actually only mutes the microphone. It doesn't actually mute what's being shared through the screen share. So you can turn off your mic, like if you're on a break, you can let the music continue to play, but your microphone will be off. Did I miss anything?
No, that's it. All
right, cool.
Yeah.
All right, the next one that has the most votes is right here. How do you handle stakeholders who participate in the sprint? Okay, so this is people who are in the sprint who don't believe in a user-centric approach, especially if this is the decider.
The design sprint is an elaborate way to deal with stakeholders who don't believe in a user-centric approach. I'm not kidding. Like, that was the reality that we lived in at Google, and that was often the case. I think it was much less likely to be the case with startups actually than it was at Google. But you certainly the majority of the time we run on design sprints. I've run design sprints anywhere. The decision maker or decision makers were not primarily concerned with customer testing the solution. They're concerned with building a making progress fast, with getting their team aligned, with not wasting money, or, with finding product market fit. There are other things they care about besides whether a user-centric approach is being used. And so, we didn't even talk about it. I think that's right, John. I don't know, like when we're talking about like doing the sprint, even in the sprint, we're not talking about like, hey, let me convince you to take a user-centric approach, and then I'll give you a user-centric approach. We're like, we're going to solve this problem as fast as we can.
Yeah.
We're going to get your team aligned the best way we know how, which is getting them working together through this bang, bang, bang recipe. We're going to help you design something. Because a lot of times people know that design is hard. They don't care if it's user-centric, but they know that design is hard and important. It's like, we have done this a lot of times. We will help you design a thing in a week. And those kinds of arguments where you don't even argue with them. Like, it's just like, let me help you with the thing you already know you need help with. I think that's the way to go. And they would just get hooked in the user-centric part of it by doing it. Like, what would happen was, gosh, the way we move fast is we choose a target customer. We're fanatically only focused on that target customer in that one moment. And we test ourselves and we make ourselves move fast by setting up this deadline where strangers are coming in, where these target customers we're going to test them on Friday. So we got to get ready for it. And they get hooked in that, it's like there's these Hollywood plot formats, and, you think like, I'm not going to be into this movie about dogs or whatever. And you start watching it, and then it's like, sure enough, they got me, every time they got me with that Pixar format. And that, like, it's kind of like that. Like, people would just get hooked in like the mystery of, can we solve for that problem? And when we build the prototype, what are our customers going to say? They stopped thinking, nobody's thinking about it as user-centric if you do it right. They're just thinking about solving the problem, and what are those customers going to say? Will we have product market fit? It becomes about the business for them and not about empathy or anything.
Yeah. I think we talked about this a little bit in the boot camp last week, but what Jake just said, I think is really worth emphasizing and underscoring, which is that I don't think you should ever try to convince anybody to run a design sprint by convincing them of the value of the design sprint. I think, and designers feel a lot of frustration. I know not all of you are designers, but like, designers, I think in general, feel a lot of frustration. Oh, nobody gets it. Nobody sees the world the way I do. Nobody cares about this stuff the way that I care about it. And I just think it's hard to convince people of something like that in the abstract. But the design sprint has so many great tangible areas of value, benefits that it provides, that you don't need to. You can, if you ask a leader, you ask a startup founder, what keeps you up at night? And they say, oh, it's that people are coming to our website, but they're not signing up, or people are trying a product, but they're not choosing to pay, or whatever. Or we've got this team, they're supposed to be doing this thing, and it's been 6 months and they haven't done shit. They haven't done anything yet. You can say, I've got an idea. I've got a recipe for how we can solve that problem. You don't ever have to have the conversation about user-centered, design thinking, design sprints. Like, you make it all about what they care about. And the design sprint happens to be the solution to that, then great. But if not, then that's okay too.
I also just kind of assume that, like, if they're skeptical on user-centered design, they're probably right. Like, their experiences up until now with it were probably not good or not credible, or, and there's no hope of winning that. And so it's just better to take a different path. All right. Should we go to another one?
Let's see here. We've got another question. We got two more questions with two emojis, two sunglass emojis. This one's different. We haven't talked about this much, so maybe let's do this one. How to get the most out of the interviews. I assume that's about the customer interviews on Friday, as opposed to the expert interviews.
A couple thoughts on this. I mean, this is always, doing the interviews is hard, and I have sought in my in my life to avoid doing those, being the one who conducts the interviews when possible, because it is kind of it is challenging to do those well. But some things that I've observed and in my experience help a little bit with doing them. One of them is it's so important to have recruited the right people. That's a really big deal. And then because like part of the premise is if you show a realistic prototype to a target customer who's truly your target customer, and then you just ask them to like do the task that's in that target moment with the prototype, then to some degree, like you will learn something. You may not get the most out of it possible, but you'll definitely get something out of it. So that's key. Getting the right customer there is really important, and getting the prototype like realistic so it looks like a real thing so that they react realistically. If you do those things, which you can do before the interview even starts, then that's one of the ways to line it up to get the best possible. And part of the thing with the only other trick that I have off the top of my head for getting the most out of it when you're doing it is to try really hard to keep in mind this idea of being both courteous and curious. So you're just like genuinely like, I want to be really curious about what this person is going to say. Like, I just want to know like everything they can tell me. So that means asking them open-ended questions and kind of being quiet, but like in every way being like curious and trying to draw them out to talk. What do you think, John?
I just added in the doc is linked to a series that we wrote when we still worked at Google Ventures. So it's gv.com/research sprint. And this was a collaboration with our friend Michael Margolis, who we worked with. And it's actually like the backstory is like kind of cool. We won't take too long, but Michael is like a really skilled customer researcher. He's been doing this for like 25 years, maybe more, maybe almost 30 years at this point. And Google in general has like a really strong sort of respect for and discipline of customer research. Like people there who have PhDs and like go to academic conferences and like debate the merits of like different approaches to customer research. And so Michael like kind of comes out of that world. But Jake, I think it was when you ran a sprint for Custom Made, that company in Boston. Like, I think that was the first time that you and Michael figured out like how to put together a study in like 4 days.
Yeah.
Start on Monday and literally not know who your target customer was.
Yeah.
Pick the target at the end of the day, Monday, and then by Friday have 5 customers lined up. And that is like, we sort of gloss over it, I think, a lot of times when we talk about the sprint process, but that's like pretty significant. That's like a big step. That's like an innovation to be able to do that so quickly, because I think certainly at Google at that time, the typical approach was, I don't know, probably would take a month to plan a research study, or at least 3 weeks. So maybe 3 to 4 times longer than what it takes in a design sprint. And so after that first sort of breakthrough, we probably did that like, I don't know, 100 and some times after that with Michael. And he does it. He still does it. I mean, he still works there, and they're not doing, I don't think they're running any design sprints, but he's still doing these types of studies. And I'm sure he's only gotten faster and better at it. And so, but before we left, we like worked with Michael to document it. And so that link that I shared, gv.com/research sprint, it is like, it's sort of like the sprint book is super detailed about like exactly what to do, which day, what time, how to do it. This is like that, but for research. So it's that same level of detail. It's not a whole book, obviously, but it's like, it literally says like, okay, first day, got to do this. Here's an example. Here's how to do it. Do these things. Next day, do these things. And if you follow that process, you'll be able to plan a research sprint in parallel with your design sprint, so that on Friday you're ready to test with customers. So that's not really about the interviews, but I think, Jake, like you said, if you get the right people in the room, the right customers, and you have a realistic prototype, by that point you kind of can't fail unless you don't actually let them answer any questions. You know, if you're just like completely, you have no self-awareness and you're just like, you talk all the time. Like, unless you do something really dumb like that, you're going to learn a lot. So I mention it because I think that process of planning it is really important, but fortunately it's well documented as well.
Actually, I might just add one more, like, because for people like me, and you can see in this Q&A, like I can't stop talking. I talk too much. And it is a big impediment to me running the studies, is that I talk too much. I too much get into like wanting to have a conversation with the person. And so actually, like for me, like another bullet point is that I'll put is like to shut up. Like I actually have to like stop running my mouth and let there be an awkward silence, so that the person will, at least Americans will always fill an awkward silence if you wait long enough.
Yeah, cool. We have we got like 5 minutes left. So let's do one more question.
Yeah.
The last question that has 2 emojis is, what are some possible apprentice paths to build skills and gain experience, especially if the current environment is not optimal for initiating a sprint? I'm gonna say one quick thing, which is that I actually think this might be a more optimal environment for, maybe not for like running the best sprints ever, but definitely for starting and getting involved. And just to give you a microcosm of that, like, Jake, I feel like you and I have done more events and work and projects together this year, like during the pandemic, like probably like 5 times more stuff, if not more, than we had done like last year when everything was in person, because now that everything's virtual, it's so much easier to schedule. You don't have to worry about travel. You don't have to worry about space. Like, it's just easier to kind of like jump into things. And so I think that's true of facilitating sprints and getting involved in running sprints as well. I just think there's like, the facilitation is obviously still hard, but I think the logistics around it are in some ways a lot easier. So that's sort of a high level answer, but Jake, do you have any like some more practical details?
Well, I know that it's always been really hard to have like somebody sit in on a sprint. I remember when we were first starting to do it, and people from Google would ask us, is there a way we can sit in on one of your sprints so we can learn how to do it and be part of it? And at first we were like, yeah, totally. Like, let's just find a time you can do that. And in the end, like, it only worked like once or twice ever, because it was hard to find a company who's comfortable with bringing in an outside person to just kind of hang out. And like every extra person in the sprint, you know, when you're planning a sprint, you're like, God, like you're usually at the max number of people you can handle anyway, just with folks from the team. So it is practically speaking, it can be hard to add a person in. Now, if you're in an organization, if you know somebody who facilitates, it is always helpful to have 2 facilitators. So, to have an extra person in the room helping that, who can really like actively help that person out, it can be great. But I realize that in practice, it is tricky. One thing that's pretty interesting about this world of video is that I think, and I've talked to some people who are like thinking about doing this idea that like you could record a sprint. You could work with somebody. I know this is going to happen sooner or later. Somebody's going to work with a team and like basically get the team to agree, like, hey, do you mind if we just like make this public? Like, we're going to record a sprint, and then you could watch literally like the entire sprint, watch somebody who's an expert facilitator do it for the entire sprint, which is one way to sort of see like the whole thing. And we try in the boot camp to give you that feeling in like 4 hours and make it a little bit interactive. But there's also the possibility maybe of watching the recording of a sprint. And
didn't Xander like do a whole recording of a sprint? Did he ever make that available?
I don't know. And I also think that I've been kind of mulling this over, like how to help people get started with sprints a bit easier in a way that uses the current impediment, so that, because we have to be on video. I think there are some opportunities, but I'm not sure what they are yet. But yeah, I think in general, it is, I just would say, I acknowledge that it's tricky. I think that if you can find a person who is facilitating and then just figure out like, is there anything I could do to help you? Like, and maybe it's helping them like prepare ahead of time, or maybe it's helping them like after the sprint is over to kind of package things up. But just trying to figure out like, how could you help someone do what they're already doing? Those opportunities are hard to find, but it can be useful. I think one of the best ways to do this though is to start using structure in any kind of a meeting you can, and build up that skill of like facilitating a meeting. And unknowingly, that's what I did. And I think what John was doing before we started facilitating sprints was when we were, in meetings or sharing our work or trying to do a critique or whatever, we were starting to exercise how do you facilitate a conversation. And that's really the fundamental skill that helps sprints go great once you do them.
I think the community might be a good place to find opportunities to volunteer as a co-facilitator. I think there's probably like close to 1,000 people in there now, and we sent out the link to join with the email after the boot camp last week. But I bet if you posted in there like, hey, I'm new to running design sprints and I'd love to just volunteer my time as a co-facilitator, I bet there's somebody in there who would take you up on that. So it's worth trying. And what do you think about the global virtual design sprint thing? Do you think that's a good, because I know that's sort of like a volunteer, like kind of social impact type project.
Totally. I think that's a great thing I totally forgot about that. Would be great. Yeah. So global virtual design sprint is set up and structured to be a way for folks to get a chance to do a design sprint on a good sample problem. And there's a lot of people participating, so you have a team. Yeah, that's a great idea.
All right. Well, we're out of time, and we still haven't answered all the questions.
Yeah, I talked too much. Sorry.
But we did answer a bunch. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you for the questions. They were super, super good, interesting. And I know we said this after the boot camp, but seriously, like, you can just email us, and we're not always fast on email. Sometimes we're slow. Sometimes we're sort of fast. But if you have a question, like, you can just email us and we'll do our best to answer. You can also ask those questions in the community, because there's a lot of really experienced people in there. And, I think you will actually be doing a service to the community if you ask questions, because I think despite there being a lot of people in that community, oftentimes it ends up just being like a feed of events, like of people saying, hey, I'm doing this thing. So I think like more discussion about how to do stuff, about like lessons or whatever would be helpful, obviously for you asking the question, but would be helpful for everybody else there too.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
So I guess that was a super long way of saying, don't hesitate to ask.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks so much thanks so much for your time. And,
yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Good to see all of you.
But seriously, don't hesitate to ping us.
Yeah. And I'll put my email in here. I know we showed it in the slides, but that's my email address if you want to write. And the doc with the questions and answers, that'll stay live forever. So feel free to hold on to that.
All right. Okay. See you guys.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day,
evening, whatever.
Thanks a lot.
See ya. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.
And thanks for pronouncing my name in the right way.
Oh, did we get it?
Thank you. Yes, it's an H sound.
Yeah.
People say Exmina. That's weird. So thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for everything.
Our pleasure.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.